But let's continue here tonight. Operation Dudula has gained traction in a sign of growing anti-migrant sentiment in South Africa. Some analysts say what's happening in the country can best be described as Afrophobia and intolerance towards other black Africans. Well, to speak to us on this, we're joined by Bwasa, spokesperson for the Congolese People's Organization in South Africa, Executive Director at the Human Rights Institute of South Africa, Corlett, Letlojane, and Tawanda Matema, who is the project manager at CAS. Good evening to all of you, and thank you so much for your time. I think it'll be good perhaps to get your insights in terms of describing then what the attitudes and the behavior that we're seeing in this country are. Is it xenophobia? Is it Afrophobia? How would you describe it? And perhaps if you can also tell us why. Corlett, let me begin with you.
Good evening, Casey, and the viewers. I think what the movement Dudula has brought in South Africa is regression, and is instilling anger, is instilling animosity and hatred in the country between the citizens and the foreigners. People that are in South Africa as migrants, that have got documents, that are also seeking asylum or seeking documentation to work and live in South Africa. I think it also undermines the progress that the government has made in addressing issues of hate crimes, if I may put it, because we have moved from xenophobia now, because it's hatred between amongst black people, because we seem to be targeting people of dark skin color that are from within the African continent. And this spirit, it has been fueled by some of the measures that were taken not to renew the Zimbabweans' permits that have been living in South Africa up until December last year. And there's been number of arrests, arbitrary arrests, even where people are making efforts to leave South Africa to travel back home. This is something that all South Africans, we need to review it and seek a proper constructive dialogue with our leaders, particularly at the Department of Home Affairs, and then also the law enforcement, not to allow to be abused by structures, movements that are not, appointed legally by any measure, by any mechanism in the country.
Jean, let me come to you and get your thoughts.
Thank you, Cathy, for this opportunity that you have given us. And tapping on what Corlett has just said, we met a long time ago. And I think it is very important that we make a call as South Africans as well as foreign migrants in South Africa as brothers and sisters of Africa when we talk about Pan-Africanism. And to start with, I would think that the likes of Ahmed Katreda, Dennis Goldberg, stalwart Elias Motsoaledi, and many other people will be turning in their grave for such an unfortunate development in South Africa. And the call is this one. It is very important, as Corlett has said, that we call for a national dialogue around xenophobia, Afrophobia, and intolerance in a loving, caring, and rational Pan-African spirit. And this call can only be made by the office of the presidency, and I would remind here the speech and the eulogy that His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa did during the passing of one of the eldest stalwarts of liberation movement, Kenneth Kaunda. How these the South African people, brothers and sisters, were around Africa during the liberation time, and the contribution that many Africans did. Today it is a spat on what many Africans sacrificed their lives for us to be today living as together. We condone, and this is very important that we mention, the resentment that South African people have toward foreigners, and mainly, as Corlett has said, seems to be linked to the black Africans rather than anybody else in Africa. And it's a shame when we're talking about Ubuntu. And it is very important at this moment that we find a mechanism to change this narrative, because we are those who must write this new chapter of the liberation of Africa in economics, because we know the roots. The roots are poverty and conflict in many other African countries. That's the reason for which we are coming here. Thank you.
Tawanda, let me then give you a chance also to weigh in more generically in terms of your own view of what's happening in this country right now.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for this opportunity, and good evening to the viewers. What we're seeing in South Africa can best be described as cycles, because it's not the first time we've been seeing this. We can attribute it to perhaps the history of the country. There was a lot of migration to South Africa, whereby migrants from other African countries, Zimbabwe, Swaziland, Botswana, were coming in as workers, not particularly to settle down. So with post-apartheid South Africa, as well as some of the challenges that African countries have been facing, wars in the Congo, you speak about the economic meltdown in Zimbabwe, there was that movement again where these migrants were coming into South Africa now to settle. So there was that tension. Again, speaking on that point, when we look at migrants generically, they make up a considerable portion of the informal sector in every country in the world, if not all. So this now creates tensions because they're engaging with local hosts on a day-to-day basis. And some of the challenges, the social ills that the people face are now being blamed now as a scapegoat, the migrants being blamed for those. But as I said before, we can best describe these attitudes because they come and go, but they're never really forgotten.
Corlett, one of the things, of course, the conversations that are currently being had now is what the impact then of a presence of illegal foreigners in the countries, and that's, migrants who don't have the necessary documentation, to be in the country. What the impact of that is having on the employment situation and how that is seen as, basically resulting in South Africans not getting employment. Let's deal just with some of the misconceptions that exist in that line, because even though the figures say something different, many South Africans still very much believe that if we had low-skilled jobs where there were specific job reservations, the employment situation for South Africans would be much better than it is.
I thank you very much for asking that, Casey. I've even seen the skills. There is a policy, there is a bill that has been passed on last year, looking at the rare skills that are needed outside South Africa to apply, to fill up those gaps and also to contribute to the economy and also to the empowerment of the labor force in South Africa. I would like to say that the fact that we have high rate of unemployment, we all need to apply our minds as to what caused the circumstances that led us to have this situation. First of all, we know that COVID-19 has exacerbated jobs. Many people have lost their jobs. And we know that in July last year, there was an insurgency in South Africa where business in Gauteng and in KwaZulu-Natal were brought down, and many people had lost their jobs. And I don't know if this is something that could be associated or be blamed to foreigners that are in South Africa. And then also regarding those that are are now, claiming or demanding jobs, low jobs, for example, to work as a domestic worker or whatever. I understand that before those jobs used to be occupied by a majority of South Africans, and it is post 1994 that we started seeing jobs being created, affirmative actions, programs, developed, adopted by government, and addressing the inequality of the past. And the doors were open for those low skills or low jobs to be taken by people from the region. And those jobs have been taken, and it's not like all those domestic work or other low skill workers are occupied by foreigners.
Sure.
I feel that we are having a challenge in the country of high unemployment, and we have not even started discussing the circumstances that led us, like corruption.
Right.
We have places where jobs have been destroyed by ourselves, South Africans, not necessarily being taken by foreigners as we claim.
All right. Corlett, we're going to have to pause it there. Jean, let me come to you then and talk about what the possible responses can be. We know that in a country like South Africa, we have incredibly porous borders. There has been tremendous corruption, even at the level of Home Affairs when it comes to the issuing of illegal documentation. So there is a general issue around the implementation of this country's laws. But how best then do you think government can be responding to a consequence of the lack of controls?
Well, Kathy, my approach, and I have already said this in many aspects of the debate, in 2017, I do think that there was the white paper regarding migration that was drafted in this country, and there were recommendations that were there. That's one issue, to maybe review those white papers that were issued in 2017 and see what are the routes and possible ways to come up with a solution. The second thing that Corlett mentioned, it's about poverty. But if we look at poverty historically, it is very important that we also review what happened before 1994. We got political independence, but we never thought the way for a socio-economic and restorative justice, for socio-economic transformation of what would be South Africa of today. And it is very important that, as I said earlier on, that we also seek the issues that are pertaining to some of these countries in Africa. We must know that there are 17 countries in Africa, if not more, that are turned into conflict. And this is also creating so much problems in South Africa, which becomes then the haven when most people would run to. And South Africa, as an economic power, could seek a way for a general conversation that will bring people on the table, all the stakeholders, the bystanders as well, for those who went into the liberation movement. I could name here retired Brigadier General Motau, who spent 18 years in exile. Bring those people on board so that we could have education for the way they lived in exile in the rest of the continent, so that there would be a consensus on how to treat one another with love and care and Ubuntu.
All right, we've completely run out of time. Tawanda, I want to give you perhaps just, less than a minute really, just to add your final thoughts to this conversation.
Well, coming back to this issue, I always hear it a lot, where there's this saying of illegal migrants. From a human rights perspective, no one can be illegal, in a sense. So what the migration project is trying to do is change the narrative about that. So firstly and foremostly, we should refer to them as undocumented migrants, because we should remember these are not a homogeneous group. It's not like they are the same. We have refugees, we have people who are stateless, we have people who are seeking asylum. So I think one of the things that needs to happen is a reimagination of the narrative. We need to get relevant data as to how many migrants are in South Africa. Surprisingly enough, when you talk about Stats SA, they estimate that there is about 3.95 million migrants. That's including those that are going to school seeking education, those that are working. That's also including undocumented migrants. So when you compare that now to the population of South Africa, that's around 60 million, the narrative that migrants are taking South African jobs, it's really not justifiable.
All right.
But I come back again in closing to that point. We need to reimagine the narrative. Let's start off first calling them illegal migrants, because no one can be illegal. Let's call them undocumented migrants, and remember that it's not one group of people.
All right, Tawanda,
different circumstances.
We're going to have to leave it
Thank
there for tonight. I'm so sorry. We're completely out of time for this conversation. Let me thank you all for your insights this evening.